Chess friends, I hope you are doing well. Torch's chess engine is a super aggressive and incredible chess engine among all the other top chess engines. That is why today I am going to show you a rapid chess tournament game played between Torch and me, where I sacrifice a knight against him. This game is completely strategic and flexible in chess tactics, so let's get started without wasting any time. I started the game with e4, we have c5, the Sicilian defense. And he goes with the French variation of the Sicilian. This is a very usual opening that I talk about in most of my videos. Black has many lines in this position. We initiate with the open variation of the Sicilian, where black can bring out his knights to their usual squares, but he decided to go with a6, deploying the can variation to prevent any knight access to the b5 square, but a5 creates a weakness on this dark square, which allows my bishop to easily join in and disrupt the dark square position. This involves my dark square bishop strategy along with knight a4 to pressurize the b6 square. In the long term, my knight can even join into the d5 square to initiate a critical invasion, which is why I more flexibly go with f4, dominating the center where my queen can invade on f3, and I can play long castle by moving out my bishop and knight. Alright, Torch decided to go with b6, he wants to develop his bishop first, and after a couple of moves, we have queen e2, this queen e2 move prepares the line knight d2 via f3, where I can play long castle and initiate a heavy attack on the kingside through g4 and h4, pushing the pawns aggressively on the kingside. At this moment, knight f6 will face e5, which is why after the knight exchanges, we have castle, noticing that the diagonal is open. Torch initiates to pressurize the center by playing knight f6, now his bishop can join the attack by playing c5, after the king moves, we have a knight maneuver on d7 because e5 could become a vulnerable move for him, but I didn't stop there because as the leader and king of chess, I must start an attack by playing f5, trying to open up the file. If you dare to capture the pawn, it will open up the e file for my queen, you have to block it with the bishop. And after rook e1 comes to increase the pressure against the bishop, which is why you cannot castle, king f8 should follow, but you know what? Your king will lose the ability to castle, and this position will be in my favor. Returning to the position, Torch played the best move e5, blocking the center position completely. After I initiated with a4, queen to g4 attacked the pawn on g7 directly. Castling is a vulnerable move as I can bring my bishop to h6, making significant damage to the g7 pawn. Even bishop f6 can't resolve your problem completely because I can initiate with rook f3. This rook will create a crucial advantageous position for me as it can come to g3 or h3. Additionally, I can bring my other rook to f1 through the f3 square, where the rooks will be unstoppable and unremovable, like motivational speakers. Let me examine this position. For instance, if you dare to play any normal move like rook c8, I can bring my rook to g3 to initiate a heavy attack on the g7 pawn. You have to block it by playing g6, and after capture and recapture, this will lead to an open diagonal for me where my bishop can move into the diagonal by playing bishop c4, the king has to move, and then rook d3 will come to increase the pressure against the d7 vulnerable knight, something like rook c7, and then I can pick up the rook on f8. This position is completely in my favor because knight c3 can come, followed by rook d1 to make a joint force attack along this file. Even the f file is wide open, and this position is completely in my control. So, let me share a brilliant quote for you. When you appreciate the many blessings in your life, the universe will find a way to send you more. Going back to the position, we saw that castling is a very bad choice. Eventually, bishop f6 or the sideline move g6 is a completely burdensome move, which is why he decided to go with king f8. He tries to protect the pawn while simultaneously threatening to push the h-pawn forward to attack on my kingside. This is his strategy because he has a half-open diagonal, but at the present moment, the diagonal is closed. So, after knight d2 followed by b3, you can see that Torch has 3 consecutive pawns on the 6th rank and 3 kingside pawns. All his pieces are located on the 7th and 6th ranks. He has to consider very natural resource attacks to increase the activity of his chess pieces, which is why he played h5, attacking the queen directly on the board. As the queen retreats, h4 and c5 follow in the game. Bishop b2 comes to invade and attack the center pawn. After a couple of moves, we have knight and bishop dances and h3 on the board to create some breathing room for the king. Noticing that the f-file is half open for the rook, where knight g5 along with bishop c4 can create a difficult situation for the king side, I have to counterattack. So, after knight f6 and the king moving up, this position is completely passive and locked, but eventually, you cannot play any normal move. For instance, some of you might consider playing queen to e7, thinking it is a natural move because chess is in my hand, then knight g5 will attack the pawn. Some may argue that my knight is faster than your knight and has a potential square on f4, but you know what? I can eventually join my queen on the g4 square to create activity on the king side. After knight f4, I can make a stunning sacrifice, which includes sacrificing the rook on f4 right away. This provides an open diagonal for my bishop because your pawn is no longer there to block the diagonal. The queen is also there, which is why I can even sacrifice another piece on g7, forcing the king to move out, and knight e6 will follow to check the king. The king has literally no square to go. For example, king f6 will follow queen g7 checkmate. Going back one move, king h7 is also vulnerable, so, after king h6 followed by king h5, e5 will come to ruin your bishop's position. As the bishop moves, knight takes f4 can ruin your king's position completely, leading to checkmate. Going back to the position, look at this position. The position is closed and protected by many pieces. Despite the protection, black can easily be trapped if I ever get the opportunity to open up some diagonals and files. This is why Torch decided to go with c4, making some counterplay on the bishop. The bishop cannot capture the pawn because bishop takes e4 can follow, so, after taking the pawn with the pawn, it unguards the a4 pawn but also creates double pawns on the c-file. Although this position is completely fine for me, after the rook moves and the bishop moves back to c1, the game continues. Observing that the bishop on b2 is useless on this diagonal, I want to activate my bishop on this diagonal to create some counterplay on this knight, so after a5 to get a post on the b4 square and the knight can eventually maneuver to d7 and come to c5 to pressurize the center, I immediately play bishop g5. As the queen moves, some may argue to deflect the knight first. But you know what? After the capture, this pawn structure is very secure, preventing any knight invasion. The G and H files are wide open, and black's kingside is very safe. In this position, we have c5, noticing that b takes c5 will become a vulnerable situation because bishop b5 can come and ruin your rook. Another strong move white can consider is knight d2, aiming for knight c4 followed by bishop b5, something like that, and white will gain a significant advantage. For instance, if black considers any normal move, I can capture the knight first and develop my bishop on b5, forcing the queen to move. After knight c4, it will create pressure on the bishop, and as the rook comes to the d1 square, this bishop will be under pressure from two pieces, forcing you to protect it or move back. Rook d2 can come eventually to form a rook battery along the d-file, making the position completely favorable for me. The a5 pawn will be lost in a couple of moves, providing me with a 4-point advantage. Some chess players might argue about how to make progress without winning material. Look, to progress in chess, you need to create counterplay and constantly pressure black, passivating their pieces and enhancing the mobility and activity of your own, so, black's pieces will be undeveloped, and you will gain positional advantages. So, let me share a beautiful quote with you. The quickest way to happiness is to let go of what you can't control and focus on what you can. Going back to the position, instead of capturing the pawn with the b-pawn, we have bishop takes c5 to protect the structure, and I capture the pawn on h4. A few moves later, we have knight f3 to increase the pressure, but black just ignored that pawn, effectively saying, "Stop this, you want to take my pawn. Just take it, because it will expose the dark square diagonal. Then, the queen can come to c7 and ruin your position." Even bishop f4 would not protect the knight because bishop d6 can attack it, and you will lose material. Going back to the position, we have rook to e1. In a few moves, we have c3 to protect these two squares from any bishop infiltration, knight g4 follows, and as the king moves back, knight f2 check is just vulnerable because 200 rated players might consider this move, but it sacrifices two pieces for one. Even capturing the pawn on c3 doesn't matter, because bishop b5 can come, rook c1 is coming, and your king located on f8 is just a burden. Two bishops for a rook is a losing endgame for you. Going back to the position, he moved his knight back, and a few moves later, we have a knight check and bishop to b5, gaining access to this diagonal. Even capturing the pawn on c3 is not viable because rook c1 can apply pressure along this file, where another rook can come and pressurize the queen side and center. As the queen moves back and the rook captures on c3, I played a very cunning move. I want you guys to pause the video here and try to figure out that move. Noticing that white may get the open f-file for the rook, with the bishop constantly attacking and the pawn too advanced, and the light square bishop dominating crucial squares, I played the cunning move knight to g6 check, sacrificing the knight right away. You have to capture it, otherwise, you will lose the game anyway. This sacrifice opens the file for the rook, and the pawn on g6 creates much pressure on the king side. The bishop and queen are creating much pressure on the black king side, and eventually, rook to g8 is a completely passive move because my rook can come to d7 to increase the pressure against the bishop. Playing any normal move would face the queen sliding to a2, threatening checkmate on f7, which is why queen e8 may seem logical. However, I can eventually capture the bishop on b7. This position is just corrupted and disrupted for you. In our actual game, we had queen c8 and rook moving to d7, getting the 7th rank. In this position, if you consider any normal move, like rook to g8, I can capture the knight on f6, consequently, rook to f7 will lead to checkmate. You cannot play queen to e8 to protect that square because, as discussed earlier, you lose your bishop on b7. In this position, playing any normal move like rook c2 is also vulnerable because I can still capture the knight on f6, forcing you to capture. Even if you capture with the pawn, it doesn't affect my position. Some of you, 200 rated players, might consider capturing the queen. Then, after bishop captures on e7, forcing the king to move, a stunning move, bishop to c4 check, will come, the king has no move, and after the queen captures, rook f8 will lead to checkmate. This position is just winning for me. Returning to the position, we saw that any move except the best one is just vulnerable, which is why black decided to capture the pawn on h3. If you don't capture the rook and play any normal move using your 20 IQ brain, like bishop takes f6, threatening to play bishop takes e7 and leading to a checkmating position, black will have enough time to play bishop c5 check. This check is crucial. Even if you block with the rook, rook c1 can come, and this position is disruptive for you. You have to block it with the queen, and you will lose the queen and the game very soon. Instead of capturing the knight, you have to capture the rook, and consequently, rook g3 check comes to pick up the bishop. I sacrifice the rook on b7 again to consider h4, and the queen goes to the h5 square. Your rook has no retreating square, which is why Torch gives up his rook because he has no other choice. Consequently, on the board, I have material advantage with a rook, and this position is completely winning for me. The game continues with capturing, and I push the pawn on h5. After a couple of moves, we have king captures on e4. After some moves, you can see that I pick up the knight and checkmate black with the rook. What a beautiful game it was. I hope you enjoyed it very much and my explanations. If so, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and share my video with your friends. Wishing you all the best. Bye bye, see ya.